Hello, beloved. This is What's Up Wednesday once again. It's noon on Wednesday, and that means I'm live, and we're talking about what's up. This actually is our last installment of the discussion we've been having on difficult decisions. It's taken a slightly different turn than I anticipated it. Where it was going, but that's been based on your input and your questions and comments. So thank you for being part of the conversation. So let's talk a little bit today. We're talking about how our community kind of factors into the decision-making and discernment process. And this is a little bit, it's kind of the trickiest one, because when we began the conversation, we kind of began by stepping back, kind of disengaging. When I began the series, I was kind of reminding you to mind your own business, to disengage from the chaotic and divisive conversations, and to kind of remove yourself from all that noise of the debate that was going on. And then the second step, of course, was to, after you had quieted the outside noise, to kind of quiet the inside noise. And I used the glitter bottle, and we talked about, allowing yourself the space to settle. But now we're gonna figure out how to sort of re-engage in community in healthy and helpful ways. And that's kind of the trick. So let's talk a little bit about community. The term community can mean a lot of different things, but when I talk about community, I'm talking about the people in your life who are on your team. They're, you can call them your tribe, your support system, your extended family. Call them whatever it is that you want to call them. But when I talk about this idea of community, I'm not talking about the full list of your Facebook friends. I'm not talking about everybody who follows you on Instagram or Twitter. Because chances are, even those people who follow you on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever, even though those people may care about you and feel connected to you, and vice versa, all of those people aren't going to be included in this definition of community. If you were to, and I'm going to use an analogy that's a flawed analogy, but I'm going to start there anyway, just to kind of give us a rough description of what I'm talking about. But if you were to think of your life as a stage production, again, not a great analogy, but all the people in your life, most of the people in your life are the audience. But your community, your tribe, your support system, your extended family, your family of choice, you might call them, all of those folks are the ones that would be on stage with you, interacting with you and engaging with you and being part of the forward movement of your life. And because none of us live entirely isolated lives, we all have a community of some sort. It's important to note, though, that communities or tribes or your team, like I said, we're going to use a lot of different names for them. They can be interchangeable. You can gravitate to the name that feels best for you. Not all communities are healthy and life-giving. They can be those things, but they can also very much not be those things. So first, let's talk a little bit about what community does, the role that it plays in your life, and then we'll talk about what to do if your community isn't life-giving. As I said before, much of what I talk about on these days, and obviously in sermons, if you've heard me preach, comes from my own experience of faith, comes from my own study, comes from my own, the language of my own tradition. And so, and today's no different. So since I am Christian, and since in the Christian tradition, the life of Jesus is the model that we use to understand what life is intended to be, I want to tell you a story from the life of Jesus. If Christianity isn't your tradition, bear with me for just a minute. I think you'll see where I'm going with this. One of my favorite stories about the life of Jesus is the moment of his baptism. And in that story, the voice of God announces that this man is, quote, my beloved child, my beloved son. And it's a very powerful moment in the life of Jesus, but it's not just about the life of Jesus. That story is also a prototype for all our lives, for all the lives of all of God's children. Every human being is beloved of God. Now, this story is a foundational piece of my ministry. It's not just a favorite story of mine, but it's a real foundational piece of my ministry, because I believe that as a follower of Jesus, our life as a follower of Jesus is twofold. The first thing we do is we receive that love, that belovedness. We accept it, we receive it, we take it in, and to kind of allow God to fill us up with it. And then what we sometimes call discipleship, then we spend our lives trying to help others find their own awareness that they are beloved of God as well. And so life, in my estimation, and in the way I understand it, in the way that my wise teachers have taught me, the life in Christ is twofold: to receive God's love and then to share God's love, to be the vessel of that belovedness in the world. Now, the reason I tell you the story today is that because ideally your community or your tribe, they are the people who are continually reminding you of your belovedness, and who also help hold you accountable for living into your own call, for becoming the person you were created to be, for sharing God's belovedness with others. And you do the same for them. Now, recognizing that your community has this dual role of building you up and holding you accountable to your own values, the values that you professed to live by, then you can begin to see how your team, how your community is your discussion partner, your sounding board when you're in the middle of making these difficult decisions, the ones we're talking about, that we've been talking about for weeks now. And they do this in different ways. So part of the way your community acts in your decision-making process is that they affirm your thinking. Oh yeah, you're right. I see where you're coming from with that. They affirm that whatever it is that you're processing. Part of the way they may be your sounding board and be your discussion partner is they may point out where you aren't living by your own values, the values that you've chosen. Say, it might sound something like, well, that doesn't really sound like you. Say more about that, or talk to me more about that, because I don't understand. That doesn't really sound like what I've heard you say before. Part of the way they may be your discussion partner is to ask you difficult questions or challenge you in some way in order to kind of help you clarify and confirm your own thinking. It might sound something like, it sounds like you're making this decision out of a place of fear. Have you done some research to ensure that your concerns are well-founded? Those kinds of things. Now, some of you may be thinking that you don't need anyone to help you with your decision making, and you can't imagine talking to someone like this or allowing someone to question you or to use somebody as a sounding board. So let's talk about why this is important. In the Christian tradition, we believe that the people of God are better able to discern God's will when we're in relationships. So even going as far back as the story of Moses, God instructed Moses to select elders from the tribes, so that one person wasn't bearing the whole responsibility for hearing God's will for the life of the community, for the life of the people. But even if you don't affirm the same beliefs that I do, most of us can probably agree that no one individual has all the answers, has all the wisdom. Very, very few of us in the world would make the absolutely ludicrous claim that we are the smartest and the best and we know everything about everything. Nobody would say that, because it's a little bit, we would worry about them if they were making that claim. And so perhaps we can understand how the wisdom of the community can help inform our decision, the wisdom of a very specifically chosen community. Because let's not pretend, not even for a minute, that the people in the Christian tradition have always done a good job at being and building life-giving communities. The Christian tradition has a long, long history of killing heretics, and starting wars and splitting churches and for using the name of Christ for absolute atrocities. So if you right now are finding yourself surrounded by a community of people that are not life-giving, that are not helping you remember your belovedness, that are not challenging you to live into God's fullness for your life, please know that you're not alone. We've all experienced that at one time or another. And especially now in a culture that's as divisive as ours is right now, How do you incorporate the wisdom of the community? Too often, the message we hear from pundits and from politicians and even from our own friends and family, I like to call it the message of I'm right and you're stupid. Because that's the way it feels, right? When we argue, when we hear people arguing with one another about politics or religion or whatever, we don't listen so that we can hear one another. We listen so that we can prove how wrong you are. I'm right and you're stupid. And that's not helpful in generally any circumstance, but it's certainly not helpful in building relationships that are life-giving, in building communities that are life-giving, that help people live into their fullness. So, and that kind of attitude makes it really difficult for any of us to trust anybody enough, to be vulnerable enough with somebody else, to be able to say to them, which is effectively what we're saying when we enter into a discussion, when somebody becomes our discussion partner in these difficult decisions, we're saying to them, will you help me get clear about this decision I have to make? So if you're struggling with the fact that your community is not particularly life-giving right at this moment, let's begin with a simple question, because this is a question you're going to start with and to begin to build a more life-giving community. And the question is just this: who do you trust? Who do you trust? Perhaps you trust them because they're someone who has a certain kind of wisdom about them. Perhaps you trust them because you know them to be a deeply spiritual person. Perhaps you trust them because they've lived through a lot of really difficult or challenging stuff and they've come out on the other side of it with this really wise perspective. Perhaps it's somebody you trust because you've known them a really long time and they've known you a really long time and you have this long, deep relationship of trust. Perhaps there's somebody you trust because you understand them to be a really kind and non-judgmental person. But for whatever reason, and whoever it is that's kind of popping up in your head as I'm asking you that question, in your life, who do you trust? You'll notice that I did not say who agrees with you. I did not say who is of the same political party as you. I didn't even say who goes to the same church as you, because those qualities may or may not be helpful. If you're looking around at all of your friends and family and you're thinking about who do I trust? Who could I walk up to and say, I need help? Or will you walk with me? Or can you sit with me? Or can I talk to you about something difficult? Or who in your life could you trust with those kinds of questions? And if you're looking around at your friends and your family and they are not the kind of people who are kind and spiritually mature and contemplative and non-judgmental, don't panic. We've all been there. If you're in that circumstance and the people immediately surrounding you are not the kind of people that you can enter into a life-giving discussion with, then my advice to you would be to start with a professional. Start with a counselor or a therapist or a pastor or a spiritual director or a life coach. Somebody who is trained and gifted and really experienced in these kinds of helping relationship. In my own journey, I've worked with a lot of different kinds of professional helpers. I'm not just talking about them as colleagues. I've worked with them in my own life. And my life is better, my relationships are better, my ministry is better because of the work I've done with those helping relationships. So if you don't have somebody immediately in your circle that you feel like is a person of trust, then look for a trusted professional. Look for a helping professional. Because the more you intentionally engage, the more you intentionally choose to engage in those life-giving relationships, in relationships that not only build you up, but also hold you accountable to your own values, you'll begin to see that the more you intentionally choose that, the more of those relationships are going to begin to show up in your life. Because you're going to be better able to recognize them. After you're experiencing them more and more fully, you're going to begin to recognize them and to seek them out in new ways. And you're going to begin to notice that your tribe is beginning to fill in with those life-giving people, with those people you can trust, with those people you can count on to be part of the journey with you. And the balance in your tribe is going to shift from less life-giving to more life-giving. The other thing that's going to happen is as you see how powerful your life-giving, your newly life-giving tribe can be in your life, you're also going to get better at being life-giving to others. You're going to be better at being a life-giving part of the tribe of other people. So this week, I've already challenged you a couple of weeks ago to daily silence, to sit quietly and to allow things to settle. If you weren't a part of that video, that conversation, that live stream, go back and look at part 2 of, I had to remember there, it was part 2 of our difficult decisions, and learn about how to let things settle and why to let things settle. But this week, as part of your daily time of silence, of settling, sit with the question, who do I trust? See what answers come up for you. They may be answers that surprise you. And they also may absolutely not surprise you at all. But as always, I will be praying for you. And if you get stuck and you really can't find someone that you trust who can kind of come alongside you and journey with you in as you continue to kind of discern and make difficult decisions, please reach out to me. Let me help you navigate that. Let me help you figure out where to start looking for either in your current relationships or possibly in helping relationships, helping professionals. So don't hesitate to reach out. So work on that this week. Work on the question of who do you trust, and let me know how the process goes for you. And as always, I will be praying for you, and I hope you'll be praying for me, and we'll be lifting each other up into the light, and we'll see how this goes from here. I'll see you next week.